There are people who hurt you, then walk away as if nothing ever happened, no apology, no remorse, and no trace left behind except their silence. They disappear effortlessly and seem to be thriving so much that it makes you wonder, was I the problem all along? You once believed that if you were good enough, kind enough, patient enough, they'd eventually see your worth. So you held on. You forgave. You made excuses for them again and again, not because you didn't see the truth, but because you hoped they would. But they chose to turn their back on you with no explanation, no closure, not even a second glance. And what hurts the most isn't that they left. It's how they left, like you never meant a thing in their world. Worse, they act like they've won. They live loudly, proudly posting about growth, healing, and letting go as if they were the victim. And you stay silent. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you know some truths don't need to be defended. Given time, they speak for themselves. No one touches another soul without leaving a mark on their own. They can lie, play the victim, rewrite the story, but they can't escape what's unfolding inside them. And that's what you need to understand. Karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. It shows up quietly but undeniably. You don't need to go back. You don't need to seek justice. You don't need to prove anything. Because the moment they left without a trace of guilt was the same moment life began holding them accountable. Not through disaster, but through the emptiness they'll never be able to fill. 1. When a smile becomes a mask. The one who hurt you is often the first to look happy after walking away. They flash big smiles on social media, post deep quotes about growth, show off new people in their lives, and constantly declare how free and at peace they feel now. They don't just disappear, they go out of their way to prove that without you, they're doing even better. And if you're in a vulnerable place, it's easy to believe them. You might scroll past their photos, read their polished captions, and start wondering if you were the problem. You might begin doubting your own worth, thinking maybe you are too sensitive, too needy, or just not enough to be worth keeping. But in moments like that, you forget a fundamental truth about human psychology. People who are genuinely at peace don't need to announce it. And the more someone tries to prove they're okay, the more likely it is that something inside them isn't. They may smile, but the smile is too perfect it feels rehearsed. They may write inspiring words, but the tone reads like they're trying to convince themselves. They may flaunt their progress, but if you look closely, their eyes are hollow, tired, distant, and disconnected. They're not sharing to inspire, they're struggling to hold up the illusion. Because if they stop pretending, even for a moment, the truth will come crashing in. And they're not sure they're strong enough to face it. Karma doesn't always arrive as tragedy or loss. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet repetition of pretending. When someone has to keep building a fake version of themselves to avoid looking at the broken pieces they refuse to acknowledge. They once made you feel like you weren't enough. They dismissed what you gave. They took your love for granted. And now they're desperately trying to maintain an image of having moved on, grown up, and found happiness just to cover up what they know deep down. They lost something truly valuable. But you don't need to perform. You don't need to prove you're okay. You don't need to post philosophical quotes so someone out there thinks you've moved on. Because you are moving on truly. You're healing for real. And you're learning to walk forward with your scars, not hide them. You're not running from the past, you're walking through it, calmly. And that quiet strength, that refusal to pretend, is the deepest contrast to someone who wakes up every day and still has to fake being just fine. 2. When things start falling apart, and they don't even notice. Karma doesn't always arrive with some dramatic crash. It rarely storms in like a thunderclap. More often, it starts as a gentle breeze, so subtle, so quiet, that most people don't even notice. A close friend suddenly grows distant. A coworker no longer trusts them. An opportunity slips through their fingers even though everything seemed perfectly lined up. At first, they chalk it up to coincidence, to the randomness of life. It's just how things go, they tell themselves. But these small things keep happening quietly, consistently, until one day they realize everything around them is slowly pulling away. That's how life begins to reclaim what they once took for granted. They once saw your affection as weakness. Your care annoyed them. Your efforts to protect the relationship were laughed off or dismissed. You were there listening through their darkest nights, patient when they were exhausted, gentle even when you were the one hurting. And in return, they treated you like a given. They thought you'd always be there, so they never bothered to value you. And when you finally walked away, no tears, no accusations, no need to be understood, they felt a strange sense of relief. But that freedom, it was only an illusion. Because what truly vanished wasn't just you, it was the quiet safety you once provided without asking for anything in return. Eventually, the emptiness sets in, not from the lack of company, but from the absence of real connection. And by the time they realize it, it's already gone. The people still around them may be many, but the bonds grow thinner. New relationships might come easily, but no one truly sees them. No one sticks around long enough to look past the carefully constructed mask they now live behind. They start to feel misunderstood, but they no longer know how to be understood, because the only person who ever truly saw them clearly was the same one they once dismissed, you. And in those moments, as they feel alone in a room full of familiar faces, the truth hits them. What they lost wasn't just a relationship. They lost a better version of themselves, the one they became when they were still by your side. They didn't just lose you. They lost themselves, the part of them you patiently nurtured, protected, and believed in when no one else did. Karma doesn't always show up in the form of being left behind. Sometimes it's found in the realization that no matter how many people pass through their life, no one will ever make them feel safe, understood, and deeply seen the way you did. And they know that. They know it all too well. But they can't go back, not because you burned the bridge, but because they did, with their indifference, with their silence, with their refusal to understand until it was already too late. 3. When you still live in their mind, even if they pretend to forget. After they leave, they won't mention you directly. They won't say your name, won't talk about you to anyone, and won't leave behind a single clue that suggests you were ever important. Instead, they choose silence, not because they've forgotten, but because they don't have the courage to remember. They act like the past has been neatly folded away, like you were just a blurry chapter in their story. But if you look closely, you'll notice you're still there. Not on the surface, but hidden in the way they speak, in the vague captions they write, in that distant look they get when talking about someone from the past that no one quite understands. They'll post half-revealed thoughts, cryptic quotes about pain, betrayal, healing, about learning hard lessons from those who didn't value them. It sounds strong on the outside, but it's really just avoidance. They won't say your name, won't tag you, won't describe anything clearly, but every word, every pause, every silence in between is echoing with your presence, no matter how many times they try to deny it. And you can see it all because you were the one who truly understood them. You once heard what they couldn't say out loud, touched the fears no one else noticed, stayed when they wanted to disappear. You didn't just hear their words, you listened to the silence behind them. And now, even if they act like strangers, you can still feel the familiarity in the way they try so hard to live like they never needed you. What's striking is that most people won't catch this. Their friends will think the posts are random. The new person by their side won't pick up on the deeper layers. But you know, and so do they, that you're still living in their mind more than they're willing to admit. They can't forget you, not because you're unforgettable, but because they're the one who broke what was once real. And deep down, they know some things once lost can never be found again. You stay quiet. You don't respond. You don't try to prove your side, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to say it. You've moved on simply by choosing not to play the same old game. You don't clap back. Don't post your own quotes. Don't try to show that you're okay, because you don't have to pretend. You are okay. While they're still rewriting an old story under a new name, you've already turned the page. You've stepped into a new chapter quieter, more peaceful, and entirely free of them. And that your quiet indifference without any performance becomes the very thing that haunts them the most. Because nothing lingers longer than the silence of someone they once underestimated, choosing to treat their existence like it no longer matters. 4. When they start doubting everyone and themselves. After some time, they stop writing about the past. They stop posting quotes about letting go or moving on. On the surface, they seem more stable, more selective in who they talk to, more distant in new relationships, more guarded overall. They call it growth, learning from experience, or setting healthy boundaries. But deep down, what they're really feeding isn't clarity, it's suspicion. At first, the distrust is directed outward. They start to believe that everyone has an agenda, that no one's intentions are genuine, that people will always leave the moment they find something better. They overanalyze every text, second-guess every glance, and stay on guard even around those who've done nothing wrong. But slowly, the doubt turns inward. They begin to question their own feelings. They're not sure if they're doing the right thing or just repeating old mistakes. They find their new relationships lacking depth, yet they're too afraid to give more of themselves. They crave love but fear intimacy. They want to be understood but hide so much of themselves that no one can get close anymore. And everything becomes conflicted. They were once open, quick to trust, to give, to connect deeply and honestly. But now they've become someone their past self wouldn't recognize, closed off to the point of isolation, strong to the point of coldness, rational to the point of emotional numbness. What they've lost isn't someone else, it's themselves. The part of them that once believed in real love, that once knew how to trust, that once dared to be soft and sincere is gone. And the reason isn't because people are just too cruel. As they tell themselves, it's because they once hurt someone good so deeply, they no longer believe that anyone could ever truly love them without an ulterior motive. That's a slow, quiet kind of karma. When you stop trusting anyone, even yourself, because deep down, you know if you were capable of breaking someone who once loved you so honestly, then anyone else might be capable of doing the same to you. They live in a constant state of alert, not because the world is too dangerous, but because they've lost the inner anchor a person needs to feel at peace. And eventually, in their quietest moments, when there's no one left to blame, no one to avoid, no one to project onto, they're forced to face one of the most painful realizations a human can experience: the loss of trust in themselves. And once that trust is gone, no relationship can truly last, because you can't love anyone with your whole heart, when deep down, you're no longer sure you even deserve to be loved at all. 5. When they meet someone just like them and can't stand it. At some point, life confronts them with what they once did, not through accusations, not through direct blame, but through an entirely new person who, though seemingly unfamiliar, reflects back an old version of themselves with raw, almost terrifying accuracy. This person isn't cruel. They don't play games or intentionally cause harm. But the way they love, the way they keep just enough distance, the way they pull away right when the other person starts to open up, it's all hauntingly familiar. At first, they're captivated. Everything feels effortless, intense, and full of emotion, too perfect to question. Believing they're finally ready for a healthy relationship, they dive in, convinced this is the universe finally aligning in their favor. The other person is smart, intriguing, emotionally aware, and just distant enough to awaken their old desire to chase, so they tell themselves this must be someone worth fighting for. They invest emotionally. They wait for texts. They try to become a better version of themselves in hopes of being loved more deeply. But the more they try, the more the other person pulls away. They begin to live in contradiction, wanting to let go but afraid to, feeling dismissed but defending the other person's silence as needing space, sensing the emotional damage but clinging to it because it feels like real love. And somewhere in that chaos, a quiet thought begins to form, not clear at first, but powerful enough to stop them in their tracks. This is exactly what I once did to someone else. They once left messages unread. They once turned cold when someone needed warmth. They once made another person doubt their own worth, question every word, wonder what they did wrong. They once kept someone close when it was convenient, then pushed them away the moment things got serious. And now they're reliving everything you once went through, not as a memory, but as a real, visceral experience. Not in theory, but in the very core of the self they thought was unshakable. They feel angry, they feel hurt. They vent to friends about how emotionally unavailable the other person is. But no matter how much they play the role of the one left behind, deep down, they know. They know they're being treated exactly the way they once treated someone else. There's no need for anyone to teach them a lesson. No one needs to say a single word in judgment. No one has to call them out or mention the past, because this time karma doesn't come from the outside, it rises from within. It shows up as a mirror they can't look away from, in the form of someone who isn't more toxic or more cruel. And what hurts the most isn't being hurt by someone else. It's the fact that there's no one left to blame, no excuse left to cling to, no role to hide behind. This time they're forced to swallow the exact pain that someone else once carried in silence because of them, and there's no one to carry it for them now. Only themselves. In the end, you don't need anyone to take your side. You don't need to expose the truth, retell the story in a way that earns pity, or wait for them to come back and apologize just so you can move on. Because the truth has already done all of that quietly, without an audience, without anger, yet so clearly that no one can deny it. That truth doesn't live in the words you speak. It lives in the silence you've chosen, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because you no longer need anything from them. You lived with honesty. You loved without calculation. You were kind without condition. And because of that, you don't need to win any battles, because you never signed up for the game to begin with. You walked away not because you couldn't stay, but because you no longer needed to prove your worth by holding space in someone's life who never truly valued it. As for them, no matter how much they hide, no matter how they retell the story, no matter how much they polish with false brightness, they can't erase one undeniable truth. They once had someone who loved them sincerely, and they lost that person by their own hand. So you don't need to punish them. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You don't need their regret, because that is already happening. Not in front of others, but in their own mind, in that quiet, hidden place where guilt lingers and no one can escape it. And when you choose silence, it's not because you're powerless. It's because you've chosen something far greater, freedom that no longer depends on anyone else's behavior. That's why you don't need to reclaim anything, because you never truly lost. You simply stopped giving something precious to someone who was never mature enough to hold it.